Okay, so chapter 4 starts the next morning, and Nick starts thinking about all the people he saw at the party from the previous night. And he's thinking of all the celebrities and movie stars and famous people. And he's also thinking about how there are some people there that maybe were a little bit shady. Some gangsters, some bootleggers and criminals. And so it's this weird mix of kind of good and bad people, which, it's a little bit skeptical, like who's Gatsby hanging out with here? And this is really the theme of chapter 4, trying to figure out, really who is this Gatsby guy? Which leads us to really the first scene is when Gatsby arrives at Nick's house, and they're of course going to go to lunch in New York City. And Gatsby is in his very famous yellow Rolls Royce, custom made, this convertible. It's this beautiful car. And during the 20s, and even now, but during the 20s, cars represented status. So for Gatsby to have the nicest car, it shows that he has the most money, and he has probably the most famous background of anybody. So Nick is just again taken back with Gatsby's car, and they get in and they're going to New York City, and Gatsby just kind of out of nowhere just says, "What are your opinions of me? Like, what do you think? What have you heard?" And he's really like kind of aware. I know there's rumors about me. And before Nick can even say, Gatsby says, let me tell you my whole past. I'll tell you the truth right from my mouth. And it's this weird long story. It's about 2 pages. And just a quick rundown. He says, I'm from the Midwest. And Nick hears this. And of course, Nick is too. So Nick says, well, where? And he goes, I'm from San Francisco. And I'm not a geography teacher, but San Francisco is not the Midwest. So as soon as Nick hears this, that's like a red flag. His BS meter's up. Like, okay, this guy might not be telling me the truth. Then he talks about, my family has all this money and they're very wealthy, but my parents died, they left me all this money, and I was a World War I hero, and I got these awards, and then after the war I went to Oxford and went to school there and came back, and it's this really illustrious past. And Nick's thinking to himself, this dude's in his early 30s. There's no way he has this whole backstory. So I think Nick's really skeptical. But it's almost like Gatsby's trying to convince him, like, here's who I am. So I think I get the sense that Gatsby even sees, okay, Nick's not believing me. So he pulls out of his pocket this photo, and it's a photo of him and a couple of friends from Oxford. And of course, this is, again, 1922, so there's no Photoshop. So this is legit. And then out of another pocket, he pulls this medal, and it's from this country, Montenegro, for being, this very courageous soldier during the war. So, like, this is legit. This stuff is real. But again, Nick is just like, who carries this stuff around? It's almost like Gatsby's trying to prove who he is instead of just being himself. So this whole scene is Gatsby kind of trying to show, here's who I really am, and Nick not believing it. So they get into close to the city, and of course they pass through the Valley of Ashes. They're heading towards Manhattan, and as Gatsby's going, he's speeding, and there's a police officer who kind of pulls to the side and tries to pull him over. And Gatsby kind of coolly doesn't stop, and he pulls out his wallet, and he has this little white card, and he like shows it to the cop, and the police officer like backs away and says, I apologize, Mr. Gatsby, like it won't happen again. And Gatsby keeps going. And Nick's like, what the heck is that? Who does that? And Gatsby kind of laughs and says, the mayor owes me a favor. So this kind of adds to the intrigue here. Like, again, who is this guy? So they're going into the city, and one of my favorite scenes from the book, and again, the movie will do this well. They approach the Queensboro Bridge, and if you Google this, the bridge is very famous. It's a very symbolic bridge in our country. First of all, it connects Long Island with Manhattan. So for the first immigrants in America that came to New York City, they lived in kind of the poor parts of town. So really this bridge represented their chance to get to work, to go to Manhattan, to make it in America. So this bridge has always kind of represented that American opportunity, the American dream. If you have seen the show King of Queens, they mention it. If you've heard Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind, like he mentions it. So this bridge is very famous, and they approach it. And Nick starts kind of realizing, like, this is a pretty cool thing. I'm with Gatsby on the Queensboro Bridge, and he sees two things that kind of, reinstates what he's feeling. First of all, he sees this funeral of these immigrants, and you can tell they're very poor, and they seem sad. But they see Gatsby's car, and it's like it gives him a smile. So Nick is kind of like, yeah, like anybody can feel that, when they're on this bridge in America. And then more famously, he sees a limousine, and it is being driven by a white guy with black passengers. And again, this is 1920s. This would probably not happen. This is kind of bucking the social trend here. So Nick sees that, and he's just like, anything can happen. I put the quote, anything can happen, especially in America, on this bridge with this famous guy. And Nick's feeling like really special. So it's a cool scene that we'll kind of get back to towards the end of chapter 7. So they get into the city, and they go to this restaurant. Now, with the context and with the stuff we've talked about and stuff that you guys already know, you can tell this really isn't a restaurant. It's a speakeasy, and it's basically just a cover for a bar. And they enter, and of course, kind of the crowd parts for Gatsby and Nick, and there's a table waiting for them. And there's another guy at the table that we haven't met yet. And one of my favorite characters, Nick knows right away who this guy is. He's sitting there waiting, and his name is Meyer Wolfsheim. Now that name is fictitious, but it is based off famous mafia men from the 1920s. And he is a gangster, a bootlegger, and pretty much anybody in New York City would see this guy and kind of cower and look the other way. And he's waiting for Nick and Gatsby at the table. So Nick is like, what's going on? And they get there, and they start talking. And you can tell right away, Gatsby and this Wolfsheim guy have this like secret way of talking. They're talking about business connections and phone calls, and so it's kind of leading into that Gatsby might not be who he's saying he is. And suddenly, Gatsby has to leave the table to take a phone call, and he leaves. So now it's just Wolfsheim and Nick. And Nick starts asking about Wolfsheim, kind of just trying to talk, in plain language. And Wolfsheim at one point, of course, shows off his cufflinks. And he says, you like them? They're the finest specimen of human teeth. And Nick is kind of like, yeah, they're nice. And he doesn't know what to say. And again, if you were in the mafia, you probably know this, but if you would kill somebody, you would take their teeth. And it would almost be like a sign of like, don't screw with me. So he's like literally wearing teeth to show it. And then he starts bragging about, I like Gatsby. I actually made him. I created him. Like he was so poor a few years ago. Like I helped him, come up through the ranks. And Nick is like, that's not what he told me. So we have like a different backstory here. So it's shady. And then Gatsby comes back. And under Nick's breath, he kind of says, like, who is this guy? He wants to hear Gatsby say it. And Gatsby goes, oh, you don't know Wolfsheim? Yeah, he's a very famous gambler. He's well known in the city. He actually fixed the 1919 World Series. And when he says this, to me as a sports fan, like my red flag goes up. But that was a very famous American scandal. Basically, one team, the Chicago White Sox, threw the series in order to be paid a large amount of money. And this was like the talk of the town in the 20s. So for one person, this guy, to fix that, it's a big deal. Okay, so Nick hears this, he's like, wow, like I can't believe I'm with this guy. And there's like this real brief conversation again, and Wolfsheim suddenly just says, I have to leave. And he gets up and he says, like, I'll talk to you later. And at that point, Nick and Gatsby decide we're going to leave too. So they all walk towards the exit, and of course, coincidentally, Tom Buchanan is in the same speakeasy as them. And he's there kind of by himself, and he sees Nick. So Nick and him talk for a minute. And Nick, trying to kind of seem like a big shot, says to Gatsby, come on over, I want to introduce you to Tom Buchanan. And he goes, this is Tom Buchanan, my cousin's husband. And all of a sudden Gatsby gets instantly angry. And it's almost like he is doing a 180 here. And they shake hands, and Nick looks, and suddenly Gatsby disappears outside of the restaurant. And that's it. And Nick is like, what just happened? Why is Tom and Gatsby so awkward? And he doesn't get it. So then later that night, we, the reader, it makes sense. Nick goes on a date with Jordan Baker, and this is right at the end of chapter 4. It's an important scene. And Jordan Baker starts asking how him and Gatsby's day was. And Nick says, it was great until we saw Tom Buchanan. And she goes, well, I think I should tell you his secret now. I think it's important that you know. Okay, so if you're going to be looking in the book, and this is the last 3 or 4 pages of chapter 4, and it is a flashback scene to 1917. Okay, so this section, probably from chapter 4, is the most important to remember. Jordan explains the backstory of Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan. Back 5 years earlier, Daisy was still back in Louisville, and she was dating this young officer who was stationed there, who was, of course, Gatsby. And they fell in love over a month or 2, and they were going to basically, it seemed like, get married. And Daisy's family was very wealthy. She's like, I didn't know much about Gatsby, but it seemed like Daisy really liked him. And then, of course, Gatsby was deployed to Europe, and they kind of promised, okay, eventually when I get back, we'll be together. So Gatsby's in Europe, taking part of the war, and he writes back and forth with Daisy for a few months. And all of a sudden, Daisy met Tom Buchanan, who admittedly was kind of a jerk, but had a lot of money. And his family was very rich and famous. So he starts to date Daisy and buys her this string of pearls for $250,000 and basically gets engaged to her basically out of finances. And you can kind of tell that Daisy didn't like him, but kind of liked what he represented. So they get engaged, and the letters from Gatsby, they kind of stop. A year or 2 goes by, Daisy and Tom do get married, and even she explains the night before the wedding, Daisy changes her mind and says, I'd rather be with Gatsby, and she's torn. But really, at the end of the day, she chose Tom and being financially secure and socially secure and that high lifestyle over Gatsby. And that's what she chose. And maybe a year later, Gatsby returns from the war and finds out, of course, Daisy is with Tom. And she's like, I hadn't seen Gatsby until at his party. And what he explained was, that's why I bought the house in West Egg, because I knew Daisy lived here in East Egg, and it all makes sense now. Nick's hearing this thinking, that's it. Remember the end of chapter 1. What was he doing? He was out looking towards the water across the Long Island Sound at that green light. The green light is outside of Tom and Daisy's house. So that green light represents his hope. That is, he wants Daisy. He wants to get another chance with her. And Jordan even explains, I don't know how he got so rich. I don't know what's happened the last 5 years, but here he is. And Nick is like, I can't believe it. This all pieces together. So Nick finally says right at the end of chapter 4, what does Gatsby want from me? What's his end game here? And Jordan says it's very subtle. It's very humble. Basically, all Gatsby wants is one more chance with Daisy. He's thrown all these parties and hoping she shows up, and she never has. So finally, when you moved here, he found out you were her cousin, and this is his chance. So he basically just wants you to invite him and Daisy to your house and just give him one more chance, one more date to try to win her back over. And Nick is just like, I'll do it. Sounds like he doesn't like Tom, and he likes Gatsby, and it all makes sense, and it seems like Daisy would want that. So it's a very famous scene. That's going to be the point of chapter 5, is this reuniting of Daisy and Gatsby at Nick's house, and it's his chance and his claim to fame. So 5 years build up, for one afternoon. So that would be the focus of chapter 5. And of course, again, there'll be a lot to talk about. Okay?